the Vice Lords had one of the first breakfast programs. There was a conflict between the Vice Lords and the Panther initially. Nothing big. It's just that the Vice Lords started seeing the young Vice Lords with some of the Panther's literature. They say kill the pig, where the Vice Lords said, no, we ain't with all of that. And if these young Vice Lords get caught with their literature, they wouldn't know how to respond to it. So Warner Sanders, he used to be a news anchor for, I think, WGN. And so he mediated a meeting between the Vice Lords and the Panthers, and they realized they had the same thing in common.
So hear what I say, for it is the truth you see. There can only be one, the original.
OG, two letters that define respect. Welcome to the original OGs. I created the original OGs to document the forgotten parts of American history. I want to recognize and give a voice to the men and women that have climbed to the top of their game. Believe me, the men and women that sit in front of this marquee have been authenticated as original OGs. My name is Mr. Rick. Welcome to my world, a world of the originals, the unique. Welcome to the original OGs. Welcome to the original OGs, and I'm your host, OG Mr. Rick. I'm very excited today about beginning a journey on the west side of Chicago because I'm from the west side of Chicago. I've been waiting to get here to interview the journey of my life, incorporating some of the brothers that I walked behind, walked beside, and visualized what life would be like. And today, I have one of those people, and he's OG Benny Lee. How you doing, brother?
I'm all right, my brother.
Very good. This is going to be very, very interesting. This brother is full of knowledge, full of experience, and he's still active in the community. Please pay attention if you're interested in Black history in Chicago. So, brother, I want to start with you and ask, where was your mother and father from?
They was from Mississippi. My mother, matter of fact, she was from Kosciuszko, Mississippi, and went to high school with Oprah Winfrey's mother. That's where Oprah was from, Kosciuszko, Mississippi.
Wow.
My father was up the road in the rural part of Mississippi, Elko, Mississippi.
Okay. They moved from Mississippi. I'm assuming it was during the time of the Great Migration.
Older brother was born in 1953.
Okay.
And my father left Mississippi to build a home for them to Painesville, Ohio in 1954.
Okay.
Which year I was born.
Mm-hmm.
And we stayed in Cleveland on the east side until I was 9. That was in 1963, and that's when we moved to Chicago, right at Kildare and Van Buren, the K-Town area.
How did that work out for you?
Well, I tell people I grew up on the west side of Chicago, but my household was a Mississippi household.
See what I'm saying?
A lot of the things that the value system that my parents had, they imposed it on us, as far as respecting your elder.
Right.
You be in the house to eat supper together, to be able to hear the stories of how my grandfather grew up. And then my father, he only got one khaki suit a year to wear to school, but when he came from school, he had to come out that khaki suit and go to the fields. Yeah.
Yeah, I get it. Because when I used to come home from school, I had to take that off.
Built the Henry Horner Project to shoot them in the air. So blacks was migrating from the east around Damon, Weston, then Kersey, Holman, Pulaski, then eventually Cicero in the late 60s.
Right.
So that was like, that era was more like, I wouldn't say a middle-class black community, but we wasn't that poor.
Right.
It was those that were working decent jobs can live in that era at that time.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
I lived in Henry Honors for a while. And you began to fraternize in the community, and you developed what type of relationships?
A lot of my buddies, like AJ, Philip, Sam, and all them guys, they didn't have fathers in the home. I remember AJ father lived on Pulaski and West End. We used to go up there to visit his daddy, but when we came back. And so them guys was into stealing, you know, because their mama really couldn't do a lot. And so me being friends with them, I got involved in that. Matter of fact, how I met them, they used to have a social center after school, and I stole a basketball, still in the plastic, walking down Van Buren, about to cross Kill there, and Philip come behind me, knocked the ball out my arm. I turned around, I waxed him, AJ and them laughed, but he was with them.
Right.
He laughed. Then the next day I seen them, and they like, hey, Benedict, you want to go on Madison and steal? I said, okay. They called me by my name, so obviously they had heard about me.
Right.
And that's how I hooked up with them. And we became what you call baby hoods. Don Juan and them was 7 hoods. Don Juan and La and Robert Snuthergan, he was the chief of the 7 hoods. And we were younger, and we were the baby hoods, right? And that was like 64 going 65. And I was the first one out of that crew to move from there to Cicero in 1966.
Okay.
Which was a predominant white community. And that's when we became vice lords at that time.
So how did that happen? How did you affiliate yourself with the vice lords?
Well, when we moved up on Cicero in 66, you already had the Cicero vice lords. Slim come from off 16th Street. He was one of the conservative vice lords off 16th Street. And he started the Cicero vice lords, a branch of the vice lord. Freddie Pye, Charles Norris, me, Mo, all of them, they were the Cicero vice lords. They was all like 3-4 years older than us. They noticed us because we was fighting white guys to go swimming at Columbus Park. We had to travel through that white community, fight them inside the pool. And so the Cicero vice lords noticed us. You know, we was like in the 7th grade. And one day they confronted us and told us if we're going to be in this era, we have to be vice lords.
Right.
And so they said it's going to be a nation meeting at Mandel Church that Friday on Laverne and Congress. We didn't even have a name for ourselves. We didn't even consider ourselves a gang.
Right.
And so KT, King Troy, of the Mafias today, Troy Martin, he said, well, since we fighting these white boys, Geronimo is an Apache warrior fighting the white man. Why don't we become Apaches? And that's how we became Apache vice lords.
Right.
So when we went to that meeting, we became the youngest branch of the vice lord nation. That was like the summer 1967. And I was recorded as the youngest chief of the nation at the time. I was 13 years old at the time.
Right. So you began your journey once you became the youngest chief. How did that affect your life?
Well, there was some responsibility, so guys had some expectations of me. I mean, being the chief, because, you know, we ran to other little groups, and I had to step up, right? Like, for example, we was coming from a basketball game at Resurrection in the 5000 block on Jackson one night, and some guys shot up in the air, and they hollered, "Faux love." And I asked my guy what they mean. He said, that's them Four Corner Hustlers. They over there at Spencer School. I had never heard of them. So the next day we went over there and we whooped everybody we ran into, but when nobody said they was a foe.
Right.
And then 2 days later, one of my guys, Jason Domino, he said, hey man, this is Fred Gage. He the chief of the Four Corner Hustlers. They want to unite with us.
Right.
And so, you know, back then, one of their guys boxed one of my guys, all that, and then we united with the Four Corner Hustle. That was in 1968.
When these, I always refer to them as organizations, what was the intent of creating these clusters?
Well, when the Vice Lords started in 1957, they were inside the Illinois Youth Commission in St. Charles. That's Pepperlo, Edward Perry. He organized a group of guys in St. Charles that were from different street organizations. And so what Pep did then is start going to these other little small gangs and turning them vice lords. It was in 1966 when Pep was looking at stepping back because he was older now. And Bobby Gore was a Clover. And the Clovers, they disbanded and some of them became vice lords, and some of them became imperial chaplains. When Bobby became a member of the vice lords, Bobby had been studying Marcus Garvey and Honorable Elijah Muhammad. So he brought a new concept that, hey, we need to do something for these young guys, talking about my generation. And Alfonso Alfred, he stepped up and became the chief of the vice lords, and Pep stepped down.
Wow.
And so it was like a trio. Bobby Gore was the spokesman.
Right.
And Alfonso was the chief to bring the numbers. And this white guy, David Dawley, he was from New Hampshire, but he had a grant from out of D.C. doing a research around inner city street gangs.
Mm-hmm.
And when his grant was over, he came back to Chicago, and that's when they got incorporated as Conservative Vice Lord Incorporation. And at that same time, Martin Luther King had came to Chicago with his Poor People's Campaign, and Mayor Daley didn't want him here. And so a lot of black ministers wouldn't allow Martin Luther King to speak at their churches to limit his access to the mass black people. But King lived on 16th and Hamlin.
Correct.
And he would do a lot of organizing out of Stone Temple Church right on Douglas Boulevard in Millard. And one day, the vice lords was in a meeting with him, and Cubic, the street enforcer for the vice lord, overheard one of King's followers say he hoped the King don't hook up with these street thugs. And Cubic told Pep, Pep said, we out of here.
Yeah.
And so King knew then he needed to talk with them. And Reverend Al Sampson, he was the only person that Martin Luther King ordained as a minister.
Correct.
Who still live in Chicago and
on the
alive.
South Side.
Yeah. His task was to go to the streets to introduce the street gangs to Martin Luther King. And at that same time, the three major black street gangs was the Blackstone Rangers, the Disciples, and the Vice Lords.
Correct.
And the Vice Lords at that time, they was challenging construction that if they didn't hire black contractors or black laborers, that the site wouldn't go up. And they shut down the building of University of Illinois at Chicago, UIC. And because Leonard Calloway was one of the first cousins of Bull, Gene Harrison, one of the founders of the Stones, right?
New Bull.
That brought a relationship between the Vice Lords and the Stones. So the Vice Lords would go out south to help the Stones shut down sites for Woodlawn. They were extending University of Chicago. And then the Disciples joined in, and then they formed a citywide coalition called LSD.
Wow.
And so the black street gangs, they didn't become part of the civil rights movement. They became part of the Black Power movement.
Now, during this time that you're talking about, and Martin Luther King visited and lived there on, what was that, Lindale?
16th and Hammond.
And Hammond, part of the area right there, known as the Holy City.
Right.
So how did that develop?
Well, at first, Bobby and them tried to provide a positive alternative for the youth that were growing up, breaking in houses, robbing people, and they wanted to shut that down. And so they started visiting organizations like Better Boys Foundation, BBR, right? And they would reject them guys because they feel they couldn't get a success out of these young street thugs. So Bobby said they got to create their own self-help program.
Correct.
And so they organized, they called a conference. It was like in August 17, 1967. They met with the two police commanders, because Lawndale got two precincts, the 9th and 10th district. And the two police commanders bought into what Bobby and them was saying, because it wasn't just the Vice Lords meeting with them, but it was the Egyptian Cobras and the Roman Saints, who were two other large street gangs, and saying they're trying to do something different for the youth.
Right.
And so those two commanders helped them organize this conference. And so you had all the major companies like Western Electric, Sears and Roebuck, Kraft Food, Bell Telephone Company. All these companies came to this conference along with the black politicians. And so they had the conference and they appealed to them in a grant form. And those companies agreed that they would initially give support letters for them to go out to grants. And one of the first grants the vice lords got was a grant to hire young vice lords to clean up their own neighborhood. Then they got a grant called a beautification grant to grow grass and stuff. And Sears and Roebuck became the vice lord's fiscal agent.
Wow.
Because at that time they didn't have a 501c3. That's how. Then they opened up Teen Town, which was a restaurant right on 16th and on the northwest corner, 16th and Lawndale. Then they got with the Chicago Art Institute. I know a white lady named Ann Zale from the Chicago Art Institute joined with them, and they opened up Art and Soul, an art gallery. Then they opened up African Lion. It was a boutique where they sold dashikis, Afro picks, and jewelry and stuff. Then they opened up 2 Tasty Freeze ice cream parlors.
Correct.
But they had one organization that was interested called Tennis Rights Action Group. And that group, when a landlord illegally evicted a black person out their home, the vice lord would put their furniture back and take the landlord to court.
Wow.
And they had no defeats. They was all victories. And then they helped relocate some black families. So the vice lords was really a grassroots organization. And the Stones emulated it out south. And they ended up with $1 million grant that they had to split with the Disciples. And the Disciples ended up with 2 centers, and the Stones ended up with 2 centers. The Woodlawn organization, headed up by Reverend Finley and Bishop Brazier, they were the fiscal agent.
Wow.
Because they believed that if you give the street gangs some alternatives, they can grow into be a viable assets to the community. But then the governor, with the FBI's counterintelligence program, COINTELPRO, they got in. And that's when they started investigating all this. But they never had the vice lords on the investigation for any wrongdoing of the funds.
Right.
But they had Jeff Ford and them up under, mainly him, up under investigation. And that's how he ended up indicted for misappropriation of government funds. But the thing was, the grant was for $1 million.
Right.
For the Disciples and the Stones to split.
So it's $500,000 apiece.
So Bishop Brazen was the fiscal agent that had control of the money. So now they locked Jeff up for misappropriating $200,000 of that money. So what happened to the other $800,000?
Right. He wasn't the physical agent, so where's the money?
Yeah.
We got all of these different organizations, and the 3 most powerful being the Vice Lords, the Stones, and the Disciples.
Yeah.
All working toward a common goal.
Yeah.
And somewhere, as I recall it, something went wrong. How would you describe that?
Well, Fred Hampton, the head of the Black Panther Party in Illinois, he started building relationships with the street organizations. And they already had him as a target.
Right.
As a matter of fact, Hanrahan, who was the state's attorney at the time, led the Chicago Police Department to assassinate him.
Right.
And then that led investigations to other street organizations. Singali, he was the spokesman for the Blackstone Rangers. They ended up trumping up a murder case on him. And then Bobby Gore, who was the spokesman for the Vice Lord, they trumped up a murder case on him.
Wow.
Right. And then OG, he was the spokesman for the Disciples, right?
Wow.
So they started targeting these street organizations, because Mayor Daley even made a statement that he can't figure out how street thugs end up with $1 million grants in his city, and he didn't know nothing about it. So what he saw was that back in his day, when he was gang affiliated as a young Irish thug with the Hamburg Athletic Club, that they young Irish gangs, they created what you call SACs, social athletic clubs. And they were supported by the local legislators and the local businesses that created these SACs to protect the young Irish thug. And when they turned 18 and 19, they would get shooed into the police department and the fire department. So he started seeing that these black street gangs had the same potential as they had, and that became a threat to him as the mayor of this city and his people. So he had to shut that down.
Wow.
Right. And so you start seeing a lot of the heads going to prison. Show you how this goes. Now, back then in the media, you know, you had Jim Brown and Fred Williams talking about power to the people type movies.
Yeah.
And then you had James Brown singing "Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud."
So
the
powerful.
Impressions singing "Keep on Pushing." The movie,
Right.
the music of the '60s was about the movement,
Right.
right? And then even the staple singers had a few songs about the movement, and that gave a consciousness of young blacks about this movement, right?
Correct.
So when they locked all the heads up, then that shifted. Now they put Superfly in the movies and the
Wow.
Mac. And then people cut off their afros and start wearing permanent hairdos and platform shoes. And now the music was Sly Stone, "I Want to Take You Higher." The Temptations had "Psychedelic Shack," or "Take You on Cloud 9." So that changed
Now
the
we're starting
consciousness.
to get high.
Yeah, that changed the consciousness of us, our generation. So we weren't about the movement. We was about hustling and pimping and all that.
Right.
But our leaders was locked up behind the wall. And then my generation, when we ended up in the prison, like in the early 70s, we was that army that the older guys was waiting for.
Right.
To turn that whole system around. Because when you look at the prison system in the 70s, every state had its riots.
Right.
Right? Because those leaders from the movement in the 60s were behind the wall.
Prison.
And they was demanding changes. And so my generation, when we came there, we were that army that they was waiting on.
That supported them.
Yeah.
And their ideas.
And you saw gang activities decreasing on the streets in the 70s.
But getting very powerful in prison.
Behind the wall. And if you look at all the leadership was behind the wall. You know, Lloyd Gino, who ran all the Latin Kings, was behind the wall. Mm-hmm. Jeff Ford of the Stones was behind the wall. Bobby Gore, Mongoose, all them, the Vice was behind the wall. Larry Hoover, all of them was behind the wall. So the leadership was behind the wall. And that left us, just like today, it left us out here. Right. But what we did, we got caught in the getting house drugs, pimping and hustling. But this generation, when they locked up all the leaders during the early 2000s, right, left these little guys out here and they started forming little cliques and stuff. And they had already declared a war on these drug cartels and start trialing them up under the RICO Act.
Right.
The same method they used to bring the American Mafia down, they used the same method to bring down the organized street gangs and stop calling them street gangs and start calling them organized crime to justify the RICO Act.
Before we moved into that era, you got Fred Hampton out here doing certain things. And I know he was a very powerful entity on the west side of Chicago. And the Vice Lords and Fred were eye to eye. I can remember I seen some guys on Spalding and Roosevelt, and they was like, "Hey, little brother, come here. You got food at home?" And I was like, "Why are you asking me that?" He said, "No, come on. I'm gonna give you some food. And it was the Panthers. And they gave me these 2 boxes of food. I couldn't hardly even carry these boxes. I got all the way home. My mother said, "Where you get that from?" I said, "Them Black Panthers gave it to me, Mama." "Crazy boy, you better stay from up there. What you doing on Roosevelt?" The impact that had on me.
Right.
It lasted a lifetime. About the same time, the Vice Lord was creating these breakfast programs and different things. So I wanted to kind of allow you to share with the audience what that was like, being able to build in the community, feed children, clothe children, and try to keep the consciousness alive. What was that like at that time, if you could share it with the audience? Because I don't think the young audience understands what that was like and the power of it.
Right. Because you had, like I say, that new generation, Bobby and them and Fred Hampton, they was breaking away from the old, Martin Luther King and Roy Wilkins and Whitney Young and all them. And now you got Stokely Carmichael, Huey P. Newton, Bobby Seals, and all them. That's that new generation. They talking about Black power.
Right.
And that became the consciousness of the young black youth that were young adults. And they started learning how to access the system to bring the resources needed in the area. You know, Vice Lords had one of the first breakfast programs. There was a conflict between the Vice Lords and the Panther initially. Nothing big. It's just that the Vice Lords started seeing the young Vice Lords with some of the Panther's literature. You know, they say kill the pig, where the Vice Lords said, no, we ain't with all that. And if these young Vice Lords get caught with their literature, they wouldn't know how to respond to it. So Warner Sanders, he used to be a news anchor for, I think, WGN.
I think so.
At that time, he was the director of the Better Boys Foundation on 15th and Pulaski.
Oh, really?
And so he mediated a meeting between the Vice Lords and the Panthers, and they realized they had the same thing in common, that they wasn't opposition to each other.
Same program.
Right. So you saw back then, even my mother went to a couple of meetings that the Vice Lords was holding because they was moving as a community organization.
Wow.
You know, and I would say the Panthers had an influence because see, a lot of them, they wasn't like convicts into the joint.
Right.
You know, the Panthers started out with 2 college students.
Right.
Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seals.
Right.
Right. So they was educated, right? And they was they understood systems and stuff like that. And it's like power to the people, right? We got power through the people. That was their whole thing.
Right.
And so you start seeing that that's how the black street gangs of the 60s were like they were.
Right.
Yeah, but it got lost in the 70s when they infiltrated the media with the Superfly and the music with
and the COINTELPRO.
All that stuff, you know.
Yeah. This show has the intent to define what a real OG is, what an original OG is. My partner and I have developed a method to ensure that if someone should sit in front of this OG logo, that they have been authenticated and found to be true in their history as far as what an OG is. You end up in prison. Now you got all these different organizations in prison. That's a lot of tension. Been to prison myself, I understand clearly what it's like. It gets to a point that you all begin to understand that the system is working against you. And you all create you create a situation for what was known as the Pontiac 17. How did that happen?
In the early 70s, the street organization was coming together up under what you call Project ABLE.
Okay.
Adult Basic Learning Enterprise, to unify everybody. They come up with these universal laws to govern everybody. Somewhere around the early 1978, Charlie Freeman, Nicky Bull, all these disciples decide they want to split away from Larry Hoover. So during that tension, right, that was in Pontiac, right? And then there was a guy named Roosevelt Daniels. He was a known drug dealer. He had knocked the teeth out of one of the Vice Lords. And the day before the actual riot, he came out of segregation.
Wow.
And so on the yard, there was tension between the Black Souls and the Vice Lords, on top of the tension between the BDs and the GDs. So it was like a tension all in
crazy.
Pontiac.
Yeah.
So Joe Smith, he was the head of the Black Souls in Pontiac at the time. And he made a comment that, man, these conditions we under is causing us to be at each other. We need to challenge this system.
Right, instead of each other.
Yeah, and so everybody said, man, that's crazy. We ain't got no win. They start going their separate ways, especially Larry Hoover said, man, ain't with none of that. And so the next day, when guys woke up going to breakfast, guys started making remarks, man, we need to tear this motherfucker, all that stuff there. And then the officer saw that. Normally we would go to the child, go to our cells, then they take us to the yard. But this particular morning, they saw the tension building, they sent us straight to the yard.
Wow.
And when we was on the yard, brothers steady talking crazy and all this stuff. And on our way back from the yard, then we heard that they had got loose inside the cell house, the north cell house. And I remember Ike Taylor, the gangsters, say, man, don't let them close that door. And we all bum rushed the door and we got inside. And so the riot really was a spontaneous thing. It wasn't planned. It wasn't organized.
Right.
That's why I don't value that day.
Right.
The day I value is the day we beat the case, because we were scapegoated. But that's how that happened. That's what led up to that. And even when we got shipped from, after they did the investigation, they shipped 29 of us from Pontiac to Stateville and put us in what you call the corner, right, where the death penalty was at, death row. And we stayed there. And even during that period, we didn't trust each other.
Right.
We were looking at each other like.
So what made all the brothers decide to create the Pontiac 17?
Well, we was forced together, and Minister Farrakhan was in the early stages of rebuilding the Nation of Islam.
So this is 70, 79, 80?
78.
78.
Because the riot happened in
Okay.
The riot happened July 22nd, 1978. We got shipped from Pontiac to Stateville October 14th, 1978. And we all in the papers. And then Farrakhan came to visit us. And him visiting us, he saw the tension among us. And he said, brothers, 300 years ago, black men were taught not to trust each other through the Willie Lynch theory.
Exactly.
And he started explaining that. And he said, if you guys gonna have that attitude, y'all done lost already. And they're gonna start playing against y'all, putting y'all against each other, and guys gonna flip it, and y'all gonna lose, right?
Exactly.
So that made some sense. And so we started dialoguing, coming together. And then when we agreed to come together, the brothers behind the wall, because Bobby Gore was still in Stateville at the time.
Right.
Before he came home. Booney Black was in Stateville.
Right.
Right. So they all came together and pulled all the street organization behind the wall together. And then King Neal, Fred Gage, Walt Wheat, all of them was on the streets.
Right.
So they started putting the brothers on the streets together on our behalf. And we would write, because we formed committees, like we had a political committee, communication committee, fundraising committee, all that stuff. And so the same committees we formed, the Pontiac brothers, brothers behind the wall formed the same committee.
Okay.
And the brothers on the street had the same committee. I was over the communication committee. So everything we talked about with our attorneys and our strategy, I communicate that to the brothers behind the wall.
Right.
Then them brothers communicated to the brothers on the streets. So it's an ongoing communication, right? And so when we would write letters, we would end it with your brother in the struggle. And then that's when the people gave us that name, Brothers of the Struggle, boss. We were the original boss, Brothers of the Struggle. Larry Hoover never lost his status as the chief of the gangsters, right?
Okay.
Never lost that.
Right.
Them gangsters honored Larry through the whole script.
All the time you were in prison, that was solid.
Before he left the streets, because they had united, became the Black Gangster Disciple Nation.
Right.
When that split came, Larry still had loyalty of those original gangsters.
Right.
It's just that some of them brothers that came into it when they established Black Gangster Disciple Nation, they never was a disciple or a gangster. They just came into that unification, so they didn't know which way to go.
Right.
And they had to choose. But Larry always been recognized as the chief of those gangsters. So that was nothing to even decide. You had the Pontiac 17. We were charged with the 15 counts of murder to attempt murder mob action.
Right.
Larry Hoover, Danke, and Joe Smith were charged with conspiracy.
Right.
And then you had 14 other guys, which was the Pontiac 14. They was charged with looting, burning down buildings, and assault on guards. So you had the Pontiac 14, then you had the Pontiac 17. one Pontiac 17 brother, Angelo Robinson, a black soul, turned state's evidence.
Wow.
And that made it the Pontiac 16.
I imagine.
Then when it came time for trial, the state split us up, 8 and 8.
Wow.
The black souls and the vice lords were the first 8. But 2 of the other 8, Jesse Hill, who was a gangster, and Ronnie Newby, Booney Black's son, who was a new breed, they demanded trial too, and that made us the Pontiac 10.
Right.
And so we went to trial and we got acquitted. So that left Larry and them the Pontiac 6.
Right.
Larry Hoover, Ike Taylor, Hop, Bayman, Weedy,
Wow.
and Gaylord.
Man,
Right.
some hell of a names there.
And so, so once we got acquitted, maybe a month later, the state realized they were going to use the same evidence and witnesses, so they wasn't worth it. So they just threw the case out on Larry. They never went to trial.
You come out of prison. When you went in prison, that was one situation.
I was a heroin addict, a shout card. I didn't care nothing about no move.
You see what I'm saying? Regardless to what we became, I became a drug addict. I became a heroin addict, the whole 9 yards. So I understand what you're saying. But we never lost consciousness.
Right.
So you go in with a consciousness. When you come out, how does your consciousness and looking at society, how does that affect you to say, hey, shit gotta change, man?
Yeah. What happened with me is I never had a chance to do any rehabilitation, fighting the death penalty, do the Pontiacs. My focus was staying alive. So I never did any self-development, right? So when I came out, I must have stayed out about 4 months and went right back. Larry Hoover confronted me like, man, you were out. How did you end up back here? And it became real serious that guys like us, the community, need.
Right.
He'd want to put that in my head.
Man.
Right.
We were looking forward to you going out there, representing us to bring these people up.
And that's made me see how valuable we were to society. And so while I was there, it was a situation where these young guys was coming in, because I'm about to turn 30.
Right.
And these are the sons of the girls I went to grammar school with.
Hello.
And so they calling home, telling their mamas they met me. And their mamas would call me to the phone and ask me to look out for their baby.
Right.
And so that gave me a sense of responsibility to my community, just that.
Just that alone.
And so I started telling these little guys if they didn't have a high school diploma, they did enroll in school. If they got one, they did take up a trade. But what we saw was that there was a slot for only 80 people to go to school in the whole Stateville system. And you had over 2,000 inmates. So
that's some crazy
we started
shit.
trying to talk to the administration, and they spent us. So what I did, I say, well, don't no vice lord mop a floor, work in the kitchen, sweep a gallery, let these guards do it. And so Larry and them joined, and the Kings joined. So they had to pull officers from other prisons to cook for us, clean up, and they was angry.
Yeah.
So we telling our guys, let the officers do their job. So
Most likely locked you down.
So now the warden want to talk. So I said, well, we're not going to go to the administration building. We're going to talk right here in the cell house. So we had like a town hall meeting in the cell house.
Right.
So I explained to the warden, I said, look, we are here because we come from marginalized communities with limited access to employment and education. That's why we're here. And now that we're here,
you're going to continue this crap?
You only got a slot for 80 people to go to school. You only got 110 jobs, over 100. And we leaving here ill prepared to function out there, and that's why we come back. So 2 days later, they threw me in SIG, so I could have cited another riot.
I figured that was coming.
Yeah. And so while I was in SIG, the guy that was there before me had left Malcolm X autobiography on the bunk.
Wow.
I had heard of Malcolm, but I ain't know too much about him.
Right.
So out of boredom, I just threw the book in the corner. And about a month or so later, after being in SIG, I picked the book up.
Need something to read.
Yeah. And I turned right to the page where Malcolm was frustrated because he couldn't comprehend what he was reading. and he put the text down and studied the dictionary from A to Z.
Right.
And that caught my attention. So I hollered down the guy to ask for a dictionary. And then Cochise, he was the head of the royal family then.
Yeah.
And he said, check this out. He gave me this book by Don Lee. Now he's Hakeem Buddha. It's called Plan the Planet.
Mm-hmm.
That's when I first got introduced to the 7 principles of Nguzo Sabo that's practiced during Kwanzaa.
Right.
And then brother gave me Dr. Naim Akbar, Chain and Images of Psychological Slavery. So when I came out of SIG, I had a different psychology. I started seeing things different. So I started telling the vice lord, I said, look, man, we're supposed to be an organization, but we function like a gang.
Right.
And them older guys still want to exploit the young guys, shank them up. And I'm like, hold on, wait a minute, man. I would hate this generation to go through what we've been through. We done spent all our 20s behind this wall. We need something different for this young generation. I still run into a lot of resistance. And at that time, I said, well, you know what? I'm through with this. I'm backing up from it.
Right.
Taking myself off count. So for 3 months, I was a neutron in Stateville. No rank,
no nothing.
No juice, right?
Well, in statement.
Yeah. And so when I got out, that's when I went to drug rehab. You know,
right.
Went through Gateway and all of that.
Now, at this time, were the vice lords carrying the 5-pointed star?
That came later. The way that came about before Bobby left Stateville, he came up with that concept somewhere around 1976, going into 77.
Okay.
From him telling me, and I got this tape where I was interviewing Bobby Boy. He said Fred Gage, of the Folk on the Hustlers, was going to Juma service, Islamic services. And he came to him one day and said, hey, Bobby, check this literature out. And so Bobby read it. He realized that every nation should have its own flag.
Right.
And so what he did, he took that literature he got from Fred Gage and created the Vice Lord's flag.
Wow.
You know, with the 2 half moons, the 5-point star, the circle, the fire, all that. And even gave the hat, cane, and glove a new meaning.
Right.
Right? And he created it that night. And that became the new movement for the Vice Lord Nation up under them 10 centers of that flag.
Right. Now we got principles.
Yeah.
Very curious.
And because before then, we were not even called elites. If you were a chief from the street in the joint, you became a general.
Right.
He vacated all of that. And so the only way to be an elite, you had to be a chief from the streets. And he taught that an elite is a servant to his people.
Wow.
That we must teach these teachings, you know, like part of it, you know, now the cleansing of our minds to stop allowing our physical craving, like our anger, our lust, our greed, to control how we act and learn how to think as man and put mind over matter. So he started giving us an African worldview. And that's what those 2 half moons represent, that we was once one nation in Africa, but we got divided into 2. For the one on the left represent our people over in Africa. That's why Vice Lords represent to the left, giving homage to the ancestors. And the crescent moon on the right represent us over here in the West.
Wow.
How we had our memory erased as to who we are as African. And that's what that darkness around that circle represent, the 400 years that we've been in the dark as to who we are as Africans in America.
Wow.
And that fire around that circle represent the white power structure that has oppressed us for 400 years. So that literature brought us into a new consciousness as to who we are and who we're supposed to be.
Wow.
And that's why people think Brothers of the Struggle, BOS, is a gangster thing. Because we became the original Brothers of the Struggle as the Pontiac Brothers. When the case was over, the original Brothers of the Struggle that was from different nations, Black Souls, Stones, Vice Lords, GDs, went their separate ways. Larry was trying to hold that concept together, Brother of the Struggles.
Wow.
And that's how it became a GD thing, Brothers of the Struggle, boss.
Right.
Right. And when he confronted me when I came back, it made me realize we got a mission, right?
Hello.
To go back and undo a lot of stuff and
right.
raise the concept. And so After I was out for a while, finally, and became a drug counselor, out the way, just living my life, that's when in '93 they had the Urban Peace Summit, bringing all the street organizations from around the country. And Gator and Omar them was coming to me. I like, man, I ain't with all that stuff. I let all that go. Larry Hoover called me from Vienna.
Wow.
And say, look, brother, this is what this is about. And he laid down what that was all about and how it's necessary that my voice be heard.
Wow.
Because I was the only Pontiac brother, not on the streets, but with the consciousness to speak to what was going on. He said, just check it out. He knew once I went down there, so he knew I was going to speak my mind.
That was your thing.
Yeah.
I want the young brothers in the audience to understand that here are two different organizations, and you understand what I'm talking about. Disciples, vice lords. But here you and Larry's talking to you as a brother and a friend saying, hey man, that ain't what we own.
Right.
See, that ain't what we own.
Right.
Hey, you're going to go back out there, not giving you instructions, but saying when you get the opportunity to go back out there, we agreed that we were on a mission, man.
Right.
You went out there, you didn't uphold your end.
Right.
You're back here with me.
Yeah.
The fuck is going on? You know?
That's how growth and development.
Bam.
Because he started seeing what he was trying to tell me. And that's when he said, we dropping this gangster disciple title and come growth and development.
Wow.
You know, and me and him, you know, we've had this ongoing relationship, even when he called me to get involved with the Urban Peace Summit. And then when he was taken out of the state system and put in a federal system, he called upon me to testify at his trial.
Wow.
And I did, and some brothers, ignorance, like, how's Benny Lee gonna testify for a GD? And I was like, he more of a brother to me than some of y'all are.
Man.
Because some of y'all don't even like your ways.
Well, I mean,
but this brother, you know, and I testified at his hearing, and even to the point when his mother passed.
Wow.
Recently, he had his wife, Wendy, contact me and say, since he can't be there, would I speak on his behalf at his mother's funeral?
Wow.
That's the kind of relationship we got.
See, this needs to be known, brother.
Yeah.
You know, so that we can all create these relationships and not have these barriers in between us because of misconceptions.
Oh, there's a picture with Hanrahan, who led the assassination on Fred Hampton and later indicted Bobby Gore for that murder and locked him up. And that's the alderman, Collins, at the time. Yeah. And
This is Teen Town?
Teen Town was a restaurant right on the northwest corner of 16th and Lawndale that the Vice Lords owned. See, it got CBL right there?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that they own.
So in closing, I just want to give you some time to speak about whatever it is you want to speak about, what your organization is doing, what it intends to accomplish, etc. You take the time.
Well, my organization is NAFI, National Alliance for the Empowerment of the Formerly Incarcerated. Now, how we came about, I had been out maybe about a little over 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of guys that was coming home was saying, hey, man, I hear you doing good. I need to get up with you when I get out. Then a lot of guys that was home was coming complaining that they couldn't get certain jobs and things because of their background. So I called a meeting, and 47 convicted felons showed up at this meeting.
Wow.
Now, who was at that meeting? You had guys like Highsmith, one of the original founders of the Disciples. You had Black Reuben, one of the original main 21s of the Stones. You had brothers that ran the New Breeds. Dirty Mike, who was him and Minister Ed ran the Disciples on Lake Street out of Hornet. This the kind of guys that showed up, all movers and shakers that had influence with these street organizations. So I challenged them that, look, man, we the most passive group in this country. We complain about what we can't do, but we ain't in a real fight on our own behalf.
Exactly.
That we need to move to become a protected class status. So we started off, we didn't have a name then, but we started off trying to build a strong voting bloc among us. Because they had recorded then 4.1 million people in Illinois had convictions in their background.
Damn.
So we wanted to put all these names aside and just come up on a name as convicted felons in Illinois. And so then somebody had a brilliant idea, why don't we become a non-for-profit, which I was against. I was about the movement. I didn't want to become a non-for-profit. So we ended up becoming a non-for-profit, and they started dispersing and dying off and stuff, so I got stuck with the bag. So now what we do, we came up with this concept that it take us to save us. And what that means is that here in Austin, when guys come home out of prison here, chances are I probably grew up with him. If he's young, I probably grew up with his grandfather because we all grew up together, right? So it takes away that excuse, I don't know what to do, because we live in witness. You done seen us at our lowest point, now you see us now. So we created what you call a reentry circle. And the reentry coach is a formerly incarcerated person that's stable in their life, that can coach a person as to how they can get stable in theirs and meet the barriers. So we don't give advice, we share our experience. And we even train them how to market themselves as a convicted felon, how to read their rap sheet, how to know the laws, because some of them think they can't vote. We let them know they can. These incentives in Illinois, like a company can get a tax break if they hire a convicted felon. They can get a fidelity bond. So we teach them how to educate the potential employer on the benefit of them hiring.
That's some pretty deep shit you just said, though. A lot of that was way above some people's heads.
Yeah. And maybe 5 years ago, the Congressional Black Caucus had a hearing up in Washington, D.C., and each congressperson had to bring a convicted felon from their state to testify at the hearing. So Congressman Danny Davis took me to Congress with him. And that's when I learned how Congress worked. Being there for 3 days with him, come to find out, I thought the Second Chance Act took him 6 months to pass. It took him 21 years to pass that. So I started learning how Congress looked. So testifying at that hearing, I confronted Congress and told, they would say that we paid our debt to society.
Yeah.
But I was telling Congress that if that's the case, why is it the Second Amendment that says that all citizens have a right to bear arms, but because of our conviction, we can't get a Ford card? But you saying we paid our debt. Then in Illinois, there's about 110 licenses that I can't even apply for because of my conviction, but you saying I paid my debt. I believe the debt is a myth, and that Congress should put the debt in writing. And until they do that, based on the 13th Amendment that suggests that all persons of U.S. citizenship should not be subject to slavery or indentured servitude unless otherwise convicted of a crime.
Right.
So that put us back to that 3/5 citizenship.
Still holding us under the shadows of it.
Yeah.
That's some very, very deep information, brother.
I see myself as an institution. When I went to school, I went to Northeastern. And during my graduate part for my master's degree, the professors there would ask me to come and speak to their classes about my experience.
Wow.
And when I got my master's, a month later, the university approached me and asked me would I be willing to teach there.
Wow.
So now for the last 12 years, I've been an adjunct professor at Northeastern Illinois University.
Wow.
And the first class they gave me to teach was the history of Chicago street gangs. So that's a
right
course,
up your alley.
that's a course you can get some college credits for.
Wow.
And then I teach theories of criminal behavior in another class on introduction to the criminal justice system.
Wow.
Right.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Sounds like, I believe it was Naeem Akbar from Niggas to Gods.
Yeah, that's my man. He was my mentor, Naeem Akbar.
Hey, so
Luther Howard.
people have to understand that people like yourself have paved a way out of this thing in order for us to get across the bridge, man.
Yeah, and that's how I look at it, that God saved me and allowed me to go through some doors. And now that I went through them doors as a certified drug abuse counselor, a director of a program, if I fail, then I close the doors for those behind me.
Wow.
But because I excelled, now I kept the doors open for those
Exactly.
coming behind. And young people need to know that the door is open for them. You know, like they might say, well, y'all dropped the ball.
Yeah.
I asked the question, where's the ball at now?
Exactly.
And what you gonna do with it?
Hey, man, that's very, very important, man. It's very powerful. And brother, I can't thank you enough. And before we close this out, I want to say one thing. Very important to me that they understand that the relationship with brothers like you and Mr. Hoover exemplifies his mind. See, you're doing some things that I believe that if brother was out here, he would have the power to institute amongst our young people in order to get them to shift in some of their doings. Very important to us.
Right.
But until then, we're just going to have to keep pointing in your direction.
And I just believe as long as we speak his name, he lives.
Hey, real simple. So we want to say to the audience, we hope that we have delivered to you once again the mind of an original OG. I'm your host, OG Mr. Rick. Want to thank you. Stay tuned because there's much more to come. That's it. That's all. Thank you, brother. We have created this show so that men and women alike can come forward and tell their truth. If you have people that you believe to be an OG, go into the comment section, write us, let us know where to find the history so that we can authenticate it, bring them on the show, tell their story so that we can add to the American history. That's it. That's all.